I've had several customer requests that they want to hear these engines, what these V8 sound like. So here we go. This is a little 5.3. A pretty normal takeoff. Hey guys and girls, yes, we actually ship a lot of conversions to women, so a shout out to some of our women customers. They're Jeepers too. It's kind of a cold, drizzly morning here in Vegas. We're still in quarantine. I have a theory that figures lie because liars figure. This whole pandemic is definitely a serious issue, but you have to ask yourself sometimes, what is the media's goal to create such hysteria? So I'm not diminishing the whole virus thing at all, but I tend to take everything with a grain of salt and go out into nature, which is exactly what I'm going to do right now. And we're in a blast from the past. This Jeep sounds really powerful, and it is. And this is just a 5.3 LS, and it runs excellent. This Jeep was built a long time ago. So this is a 5.3 LS, but you probably wouldn't know it. It's got a lot of power. Sounds great. We put an aggressive exhaust on it, but this build was probably done, and I'm guessing here 7 years ago, maybe even longer. It has all of our early components in it, and it's back at the shop, not because nothing doesn't work. The customer absolutely loves the way it runs. We're doing some work on the winch and the heater. Got an ESP light on, and as we've discussed a lot of times, you got to have the steering wheel straight, and it's not straight in this vehicle, but the engine performance is excellent. If you look here at the cruise control, you'll notice that this is our really early cruise control setup. See that little light on the cruise stalk? That's not only the on-off indicator, it's no longer on the dash in these early ones, but it also acts as a fault indicator. And we actually interfaced this stuff digital, analog, and mechanical. So that cruise control switch has all the electronics in it that a GM cruise control switch would have. So rather than interface it through the CAN network like we do today, it was done mechanically. Now there's advantages and disadvantages. By far the biggest disadvantage is the complexity. Now a lot of folks had issues because of the complexity. It wasn't just a plug and play swap. But I will say that if you did these swaps properly, they were excellent. The majority of these early conversions are still on the road. Some have been upgraded to the CAN module, but the reality is these early swaps were reliable. They were just more complex. What's more complex? Well, first we ran a GM body control module to get the functionality that we wanted. The body control module in these GM operating systems controls things like cruise control and tap shift. Now, of course, many years later with our CAN module, we're interfacing all that over the CAN network, and we've eliminated the body control module. Another difference would be the Prindle, the PRNDL on the dash. You can see this one's fully functional. Now, when I come back into the tap shift mode, you see it's only going to say 2, because that's what the Jeep said originally. And our tap shift mode today, of course, shows current gear. But back then, we ran a linear potentiometer on the shifter for a shift lever position sensor. Now you say, what are some of the advantages of this early system? Well, this system pretty much ran the GM operating system completely independent from the Chrysler operating system. So if the Chrysler side had a meltdown like the TIPM, it would simply keep running. And I've actually had that happen. We basically bypassed the TIPM altogether for engine performance. So critical circuits like the fuel pump were run through the GM side. Again, this added more complexity. It had its own fuel pump relay in the power distribution center, etc. By integrating all those things into the Chrysler side, it's cleaner, there's less components. However, you're eliminating that redundancy. Now that doesn't mean that the newer swaps aren't reliable. They're just as reliable as an OE Chrysler operating system is. When we started doing these conversions back in 2008, 2009, we really had no LS-JK competitors. They were working on Hemis, but it was considered too complex to get the LS into the JK. But nobody could deny the benefits. The engine was smaller, lighter, and it had a much better transmission than anything Chrysler offered. In fact, I would venture to say that this 5.3 LS that was built many years ago runs better than any supercharger, any turbocharger, and yeah, I would say any Hemi I've ever driven. I'm cruising up the Parkway right now effortlessly with this little 5.3 and this relatively heavy JK, and a lot of that has to do with the transmission. And that's not to say that the Hemis don't have more horsepower than this little 5.3. I'm just talking about pure drivability. If you compared this 6L80 to the early 545 RFE, there is no comparison. This transmission has a 4-to-1 low and a 0.66 overdrive. It's low friction, it's low heat, it's just a modern transmission. And and that translates to getting the horsepower to the ground more effectively than what came before it. So guys, soon we're going to have some videos up on 10 speeds and LT4s and other things, but I thought it'd be kind of neat to take a ride in a blast from the past, as I said. The build is much less complicated today, not only because of the electronics, but because of the hardware. This Jeep has steel brackets for the accessory drive. In the early days, we decided that we wanted to run the JK accessories because it just made sense. We could run the GM accessories, and we did, but there's a lot more hacking and clearance issues and conflicts if you go that route. Putting the air compressor where GM puts it on the passenger lower meant interferences with the upper control arm, meant you might have to notch the frame. The AC lines were pretty goofy. The power steering pump on the other side was pretty much slammed up right against the steering gear. So all those years ago, we used a similar layout that we use today. That is, we put everything right back where Jeep had it. We use the stock air conditioning lines, we use the stock power steering lines, we use the stock Jeep tensioner. It's a very clean setup. The difference being that this vehicle has steel brackets that were fabricated, and that's where our billet brackets are at today. But back in this day, it took a little bit of diligence to get these to run true. Once you did, they ran for the life of the vehicle. You guys probably saw the 2008 JK, which was our first conversion. That Jeep's turning over 200,000 miles with the original steel belt drive, and it's only gone through 2 belts during that time. So if I had to describe this swap, I'd have to say it compares to, let's say, a turn of the century, and I'm talking the turn of the 20th century automobile made by the English, where each one was pretty much hand fit. All the components were matched to each other, serialized to each other, because there wasn't any interchangeability of parts. Where the Americans prided themselves on making standardized parts. Lincoln, who worked for Cadillac, was really ahead of his time in that, where you could take a Cadillac, disassemble it, and reassemble it with the parts from any other Cadillac, and it would work. And they actually did that. They sent some over to England, and the English were very impressed at the tolerances we could hold. So basically that was a bolt together, plug and play setup, and things weren't handcrafted. So that's kind of where our kit is today, with the can module, billet brackets, easy mounts. Now we should say something about the easy mounts. Back in this day, we were cutting the mounts off just like the Hemi guys and then welding new mounts on. Now that's awesome, they're really strong and that's great, but it did add about 6 hours to the build, because first you had to cut the old brackets off, grind the frame clear. The odds are you might damage the brake lines or the electrical lines if you didn't move them out of the way. Of course, weld the new brackets on, and if you're not a welder, you had to have that done for you. So by going to the easy brackets to just drop in, we have 2 advantages. One, we knocked a lot of time off the build, and 2, they're adjustable. So if they're not exactly where you need them, you can just simply loosen the bolts up and move them in 3 axis, up, down, X and Y. So I'm proud of these early JKs. There's still a lot of them on the road. Somebody had to crack that nut. Somebody had to put an LS in a JK. And pretty much anybody that drives a GM powertrain with a GM transmission compared to the early Chrysler transmissions, I think, has to admit that there is really no comparison. There's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to cross-manufacturer swaps. But the reality is they are legal and they can present a lot of advantages. If you look at a company like Chrysler that has basically V6s and then their heavy iron Hemi, there's really nothing in between, where these GM all-aluminum lightweight LSs are not only more compact, but they put out the horsepower and they have better transmission. So there's a lot of advantages integrating the GM powertrain into the JK. I'm pretty confident that any of you who drove this 4-door JK with this little 5.3 and a 6-speed would be really happy even today. Even though this Jeep was built many, many years ago, it still makes sense. There you go, we're a 4-cylinder right now. And you can barely tell. This exhaust system obviously is doing a really good job of masking it. So if you can find yourself a low mileage LS, whether it be a L99, LS3, L94, L9H, LC9, LMG, they're all excellent engines. The same holds true to the 6L80. The core price for a 6L80 has just gone up again, and that drives up the used market. So I have to go back to a speech that John F. Kennedy did when I was a baby. Of course, we were in the space wars with the Soviet Union, and it was a race to the moon. I actually knew some of the guys that worked on some of the surveyors and some of the early probes that were sent to the moon, and I don't think today's generation really has a grasp on the challenges that we had back then. So in his speech, Kennedy said, "We choose to put a man on the moon and safely bring him back, not because it is easy, but because it is hard." What I take out of that is we could have cut corners. We could have done things in a different way, just like some of these other conversions are done. And what he said, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back, that was also very critical, because it would have been easy to put a man on the moon and not bring him back. So getting an LS into a JK early on was definitely a challenge. It was hard. It was not easy. Yes, we could have interfaced it. Yes, we could have hybrid it. And there's a lot of other things that we could have done, just gone with the Hemis. But we chose not to do that. And a decade later, I am extremely happy we chose to do that, because our conversions now, when I drive them, in my opinion, are second to none. I don't care if you spend $30,000, $40,000 on a Hemi, even with an 8-speed, you just can't compare that. The power delivery and the longevity and all the other advantages that the LS and the LT have. And sometimes you have to see where you came from to know where you're at. This customer really likes this Jeep, and my guess is going to be on the road for a long, long time. And I'm going to recommend that this customer not upgrade, even though it has early Gen 1 electronics. There's no reason to. Everything works. It's solid. And a lot of times guys just want to upgrade, and I don't particularly subscribe to that philosophy. It's like computers. If you buy one today, it's obsolete tomorrow, so you go out and buy another one. If it works and you're happy where you're at, just stay there. And there are hundreds of these early MoTech conversions on the road. So we're going to hit the mountain in this rain and this fog and this snow, and we'll see you soon.